Hi there. Welcome back to another one of Kaplan's GED live lessons. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the RLA Extended Response section. I'm Nick Bascom, and I'm excited to show you how to master this part of the GED test. I know how to analyze arguments. We're going to get two of them, right, with the GED RLA Extended Response section. We need to know how to analyze those, what they're claiming, what the evidence is that they're providing to support. We also need to learn how to evaluate them, how to say which one of them we prefer to the other one. So we're really going to learn how to analyze an argument. We're also going to learn how to outline and plan a response to that argument. We're also really going to look closely at the specific requirements for scoring well in the extended response section. So you're going to know exactly what you need to accomplish to get that target score. Okay, so let's keep diving. Let's make sure we know in general what the RLA extended response section entails. Well, like I said before, we need to read two passages, and then we need to write an analysis about those two passages in the text box. We need to say which one we prefer. We need to evaluate it in light of the evidence that it provides. And we even need to deal with that other passage too, in terms of discussing why we didn't choose it. There's a lot that goes into mastering this extended response section. Now, in terms of the timing, we will have 45 minutes to do everything. Read, plan, type, revise, everything. We have 45 minutes to accomplish that. But once you see the steps that we can take and how we can master this process, 45 minutes is going to feel like plenty of time. Okay, so one thing that's very important to know about the extended response section is that it makes up about 20% of our total score. So it is a big chunk of our points, which is why this session is so important. Okay, so we said we were going to start talking about the different things that we need to do to get a really great score. Well, we're going to get started right now. One of the things that, it's very important for us to understand is that we are scored on different criteria. We are scored on our ability to analyze, how well we develop our own essay, including the organization of that essay, and even though it's very minimal in terms of the overall score, we still need to make sure that we pay attention to how well we conform to sort of standard grammatical and spelling conventions. Okay, so how we can analyze a passage, how we can develop our response, including how well we organize that response into individual paragraphs. And then, of course, at the very end, we need to make sure we proofread so that we can avoid those big-time spelling and grammatical errors. All right, so we're starting to get a sense of what we need to do to get top points. All right, let's dive into the guidelines a little bit. All right, so they're going to provide the guidelines the entire time we read a passage. But, of course, we want to have these memorized before we ever take the test so that we never have to, reread the instructions. Like, okay, it's the extended response. I know what I'm doing. Let's get to it. It gives us more time, right, to spend on the actual task in the 45 minutes we know that we have. All right, let's run through these guidelines so that we're feeling more comfortable with them so we don't have to reread them on test day. Of course, we know, we've seen this a couple times, we get 45 minutes max. Here's a big takeaway from that, though, and that is don't rush. We're going to have a method, a process. So we're going to know how to attack this in a way that leads to points that avoids rushing, right? Which can lead to sloppy writing and more mistakes. So we're going to avoid that. All right. Definitely want to make sure that in those 45 minutes, we read those passages closely and we dissect them. We think about what's their central message. What is the evidence the author provides to support that message? Definitely make sure you do not rush through that step. Spend your time there. Of course, we also want to make sure that we think about what our response will be, okay? Which means we need to outline, and part of our time will be spent outlining. Make sure you plan before you begin. It will help your writing, I promise. Okay, so we've got some tips here. Next, length. Students always ask this in class. How long should it be? Well, in general, I want you to focus more on making sure your writing is strong and effective. That's the most important thing. But here's a general sense of how long, how extensive your essay should be. It should be between 4 to 7 paragraphs, And each of those paragraphs should be 3 to 7 sentences each. Okay? Now that can add up, but remember, if we write something super, super short, we're not going to get the score that we're looking for. All right, so if we fit within this range, we're going to be okay in terms of the length. Okay, so we got a couple guidelines down. Let's get a few more. Remember, the more we have these memorized, the better off we're going to be on test day because we won't have to read them a second time. All right, so something very important is that as you are reading through those passages, you want to pay close attention to what is called argumentation, right? Basically, the component pieces of an argument. That means you really want to focus on claims, what the author's point or perspective is. Then you want to pay close attention to how that author supports those claims with evidence and reasoning. Okay? And you also want to evaluate that evidence and that reasoning. Does it come from a credible source? Is the source named? All this stuff is very, very important in our evaluation of the author's ability to construct a persuasive, strong argument. Okay, so as we write our essay, here are a lot of little things that we want to keep in mind. First, of course, we want to make sure that we identify which position is better supported. Pick a side. Make sure it's very clear, too, in your thesis, which side you are taking. Okay, so look for the essay that you feel like is supported by more evidence, by better evidence, right? Which one has more credible sources, or even the speculation makes a little bit more sense to you. Go with that one. Now, here's another really huge point, is that when you are writing up your own essay, you need to make sure you explain why the position you chose is the better one. Don't just say that it's better and then describe what it says. You need to look at its support and say how or why that support helps the argument to be better. Okay? So remember, explaining the evidence and how it supports the argument is much more important than just listing what it says. Okay, so one thing that sometimes gets people, tripped up a little bit is they think, wow, geez, I really don't support this argument. I would never argue that in real life, but it's definitely the better argument. What do I do? Well, remember, it doesn't matter what side you take. There's no wrong or right side to take. And nobody's ever going to see this essay other than the graders. So you don't need to worry about taking a position that you really detest, right? The only thing we are concerned about is making sure we write the best possible essay we can write. And if that means you end up sort of defending the position that you don't agree with, that's okay. That's okay for the purpose of this exercise. To get the most points, that's what we want to do here. Okay, so remember, as we explain the position that we're going to support, we need to make sure that we defend that position by citing evidence from the passage. We don't want our entire essay just to be, simply restating what the passage itself has said, but we do want to use and integrate quotations or pieces of evidence from that passage as we explain how it's helping our passage, okay? We also want to make sure that we develop and organize, which means build your main points thoroughly, have strong topic sentences, have paragraphs full of good evidence and solid reasoning to support your position. We also really want to make sure, too, that we build our essay in a logical order. And, that means maybe we start with a strong point. Maybe we finish with a good point that might be a nice tie-in to the other passage that we're not supporting. We're going to take a look at a template here in a little bit where we really fully flesh out what this means, to pick your key points and to sort of process them in a logical order. Okay, so of course, how we organize is part of that order. And we also want to be thinking about the classic rhetorical triangle, which is always, okay, who am I speaking to? And what's the purpose and message what's the purpose of the message that I'm giving to my audience? Okay? Always think about that. You also want to think about the rhetorical situation coming from the passages that you're getting. That might help you evaluate and analyze them, right? Who's speaking? What's their message? What is their audience, right? Those types of triangles, right? We get triangles all around, can help us sort of develop and structure our own essays. Something that's very important for organization is using transitions effectively. Transitions within paragraphs can be really strong. Transitions between paragraphs are absolutely essential. Think keywords like first, furthermore, finally, however, yet, but, nevertheless. All these different kinds of transition keywords can really help us form a really powerful and a really well-flowing essay as well. All right, word choice. We know that word choice is important. Choose your words carefully. All right, words can be powerful, obviously very powerful items in this essay, so we want to be very careful with our word choice. Something that can really help the flow of your essay, but also the interest, sort of maintaining the interest of your reader, is to vary your sentence structure. Sometimes people forget about that, but if you have too many sentences in a row that sort of have the same structure, then it can be repetitive and redundant, and the essay doesn't quite read as well. But if we vary that sentence structure, maybe because we have some left branching sentences, those are sentences that sort of start with maybe a dependent or modifying clause before we get to the main clause, or right branching sentences, or other kinds of ways to vary our sentence structure can really help maintain interest and flow of our essay. Finally, we know, probably a lot of us hate this step, but making sure that we reread and revise our response is absolutely key. We want to save some time for that because we're going to make some mistakes. We're going to make some typos, right? Maybe we're going to, mess up some structures. That's going to happen. That's okay. We just want to make sure that at the end of the passage that we take a moment to revise, to proofread, to make sure we get rid of as many of those as we possibly can.